have all of you who are in the audience introduce yourselves, and I will start with our translator from last night.
Good morning, Melissa Cameron, Island Nature Trust, Prince Edward Island, Canada. Laura Johnson from Concord, Massachusetts.
And former president of Massachusetts Audubon Society and former director of the ILCN. Yeah, okay, that.
Nigel Sharp from Adrenata Foundation.
Renee Kivico and McLean Trust Alliance.
Renee runs the rally every year, just to tell you who we're talking to here. Vic.
Vic Miles, Australian Land Conservation Alliance.
Give us a little more.
Melbourne.
Melbourne.
Previously with Trust for Nature and the steering committee member of the ILCN.
And a steering committee, and really one of the founders of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance.
Phoebe Pace, Australian Land Conservation Alliance.
Thank you.
Charlie Kashmir, Nobel Peace Prize winner. Going through grant and I also teach at Brandeis University.
Hello, I'm Michelle Young-Lee. I'm from Canadian Wildlife Service in Ottawa.
Excellent.
John Peterson, Network for Landscape Conservation, based in Massachusetts.
And you're really the network coordinator, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, yeah.
To keep my name, just remember the name Coca-Cola. I work for a First Nation government based in the Northwest Territories. We're establishing new protected areas.
A very, very ambitious project, a very large. How big is the proposed protected area?
3,000 square kilometers.
Yeah, it's big.
Good morning, Ava Washker-Meadows with the Land Trust Alliance.
Miguel?
Fundació Catalunya La Pedrera in Barcelona, Spain, IUCN, Specialist Group on Privately Protected Areas, Eurosite, and probably forget some.
Yeah, and the host of the last ILCN Global Congress. Okay.
Bat Conservation International, Mexico, biologist turned conservationist.
We're just introducing ourselves, so did I get you? No.
Michael Fornish from the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, North of North.
Good to know, good to know. Sharon.
Sharon Farrell, California Landscape Stewardship Network.
Matthias.
Matthias Bruma from the Catalan Network for Nature Conservation.
Sean.
Sean Johnson, University of Montana.
Cecilia Rabel, Policy Advisor at Trust for Nature and also the Regional Representative for Australasia from the ILCN.
Daniel Oates, Community Land Council, Western Australia.
Carolina Buckley from the Peruvian Society for Environmental Law.
And you just came in the room, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Roberto de la Maza from Mexico. I love nature, and Canada is really beautiful.
Ah, excellent.
Marcelo Frias from Argentina.
Argentina. Excellent. Okay, we now have, well, we still have people trickling in. Okay. And we could keep going for another hour. Okay. Hernan, very quickly, can you introduce yourself? Hernan, yeah, just tell us who you are.
Well, I'm Hernan, I'm the regional representative for Latin America for IFCN.
Yeah, exactly. And former director of conservation at Tompkins Conservation. Can you introduce yourself? Yeah.
Hello everyone, my name is Aurora. I am from Chile and I am the executive director of the Pingüino Bay Natural Reserve in Tierra del Fuego, Chile. I work with babies and the reserve is a private conservation area.
Right. Go ahead. Hubert.
Hubert Pelletier, I'm with NCC here in Quebec. director of partnerships. So I'm kind of leading a collective of all the land trusts going together for funding, but also organizing connectivity networks and protected areas.
Okay, so we now have a full room. Anybody else who walks in the room, you're going to have to introduce yourself to them. We have a wonderful panel of individuals who lead fairly large networks all around the world, and I will introduce them one at a time as they come up to make their presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions. So my first guest is Jennifer Miller Herzog. I really don't need a paper to tell you that she has been working internationally and in the United States in conservation for just a few years, and is now the interim director of the Land Trust Alliance, which really was the kind of home base for this kind of gathering of land conservation organizations for many, many years. So she is the director, the interim director, and I've had a chance to work with her in great depth for a while, so she's the real thing. Jennifer.
Thank you. That is the best introduction, Jim. Thank you. I so appreciate that. Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. So there are at least two people in this room, maybe more, who could do this presentation, possibly quite better than me. I also didn't know there were multiple Nobel Prize winners, so, you know, intimidating crowd today, this morning. But I'm excited to share a little bit about the Land Trust Alliance with all of you. We are the national organization in the United States that supports land trusts and the private land conservation sector in the US. This is our mission, saving the places people need and love across America. We do that by strengthening land conservation and by building strong leaders and strong land trusts. These are our strategies from our last strategic plan. We are getting ready to launch a new strategic planning process here in about a year's time. But we essentially work to elevate land conservation, build awareness of this as an important conservation strategy as a priority nationwide in the US. We are looking to accelerate the rate of land conservation. We want to build healthy and high-performing land trusts. We've made a promise in perpetuity to conserve land. Land trusts do that when they put a conservation easement on a property, and so that's a big responsibility, and we need organizations that are strong and sustainable for the long haul. And then we look at, we have an entire department, in fact, dedicated to defending the land trust community from threats and defending against challenges to permanent land conservation in the US, which we are seeing grow as well. I want to share just a couple milestones along. Jim asked us to talk about the growth trajectory of our networks. We are a 42-year-old network, so we have a long history, and we have a close association with Lincoln Institute as well, because we were really the sort of seed for the Land Trust Alliance. Happened at an initial meeting at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. A couple people in this room, I think, were probably there. So, or people at this conference certainly were there. I'm not going to cover all of these, and there's some background. We were asked to share some background reading, and there's a nice milestone that we did when we celebrated our 40th a couple of years ago. But I wanted to call out just a couple of things here. This is these milestones for us are a combination of our organizational development as a member network. Some of these address key milestones in our delivery of educational and technical resources for land trusts. Some are about addressing the advocacy we've done to achieve policy and funding goals in the US, and others are sort of new tools and programs that we are developing to address emerging issues. So we'll be talking a bit more about what we're all seeing on the horizon in a few moments. But there are a couple of things here I would call your attention to. We were founded, as I said, in '82. We have a magazine, long-running magazine, that has been published now and sent to our members. In '89, we created the first version of the Land Trust Standards and Practices, which are the ethical and technical guidelines for running a land trust. I know some of you are familiar with those, and we update those regularly, working in collaboration with the community. We also created an accreditation program and commission to run that independent of the Alliance, but we base a lot of our education work on helping land trusts both achieve the standards and practices and also be ready for and secure accreditation should they choose to pursue that. We have a learning center online, and we've also worked a lot on both conservation defense legally in the US and on the policies that form the foundation for private land conservation in our country. We created a legal insurance tool to help land trusts defend legal threats, legal challenges to their conservation easements. So that's sort of a unique offering that helps land trusts do that. We run now an annual lobbying day in Washington, D.C., where land trusts from all over the country fly in and work on policy priorities together, meeting with members of Congress. I want to call out, we have a federal conservation tax easement incentive that we have worked on first to make it permanent and then to defend it from attempts at fraud and abuse. So we've had a robust advocacy and policy work around our federal tax easement incentive over a number of years now. And then there's some emerging issues. We launched a land and climate program 7 years ago to help land trusts really dig in on the question of how you think about land conservation in a changing climate, and in particular how you steward lands when we are looking at unprecedented impacts on the landscape. I mentioned we turned 40, and then last year we hosted our first Indigenous Land Conservation Summit in conjunction with our annual conference rally. We just held the second one a couple of weeks ago at our conference. So we are looking also at ways we can better support Indigenous land relationship access and return as well. So if you have an opportunity to show technology from the 1980s, I think you always should, because there's been enormous change, right, in both our world and in the land conservation sector since the mid-80s. Obviously, this is what it looked like for us to do our work back then. The right-hand picture are some images of some of the resources we produced early on. Now, our resource center is all online, pretty much, and that we just redid that a couple of years ago. So this is thousands of resources for land trusts on how to do land conservation work effectively. So, and our sector is incredibly broad. We have 950 members. I'll speak to that. Here, I'll take a moment. 950 members across the country, and that includes everything from all volunteer land trusts, no paid staff, run by a volunteer board, many all volunteer land trusts among our membership, all the way to the Nature Conservancy, a global international conservation organization, and everyone in between. So we are looking at a very, very broad spectrum of our members. We were also asked to speak to the development of our conferences and our membership and the sector, so just wanted to share this. This is how the growth in our annual conference has happened since we held the first one in 1985. So really strong growth through the 80s and 90s, and then sort of leveling off as the sector matured in the US. The very big bump were our virtual rallies in the COVID years. You all know that as well. Very quick pivot to be able to run those virtually. Our team did that, and we saw incredible participation. So that was a bonus of having to not be together. But we also just set a record in Providence a couple weeks ago for our largest rally in person ever, too. So that interest continues. That's our COVID bump. And I also wanted to share a little bit about the growth of land trusts in the U.S. This is from 1950 to the present, essentially, or to our last census. We do a census of land trusts every 5 years in the U.S. So incredible growth through the 80s and 90s. This little blip here was actually, as we began to refine the data for census, we made sure that what we were really surveying in census were conservation land trusts. So we had some people in the data set who were focused on historic and other kinds of conservation, preservation, and so that was a refinement in our data that resulted in that sort of blip down. But we are also seeing an increase in mergers, so land trusts merging with each other. So sometimes that often results in stronger and more effective organizations, but it also means you have one land trust where you once might have had 2 or 3 or 4 as a result of those mergers. I just wanted to mark this. This is 1985. The next chart is going to pick up there, which is land conserved by state and local land trusts. As I mentioned, our membership is very broad, but I would say, the sweet spot for the work that we do and the resources we provide are really state and local land trusts, mid to mid-sized larger land trusts, those folks who really need our services, people who are taking the leap up as an organization. So this is what the increase in land conservation has looked like among those state and local land trusts, but in our 2015 census, 58 million acres conserved, private land, 2020, 61 million acres conserved of private land in the US. So this is a sector that continues to grow, even though we're not necessarily growing the number of land trusts any longer. So we were asked to speak to the challenges we're seeing. And I'm going to tick through these really quickly because I think we're going to probably see some themes. For us as a mature network, we're not seeing a lot of new land trusts showing up in the US. Land trusts appear in 93% of the counties in the US, so coverage is quite good, with a couple of, I would say, notable exceptions, places, in the Southeast, there may be some gaps. And the other thing I'll say is, we are also seeing an increase in interest in forming indigenous land trusts, indigenous-led and native-led land trusts. So we are looking at ways to support that. But otherwise, we're not seeing a lot of growth in new organizations. It's hard sometimes. We are basically capacity-building organizations. We are building leaders, organizations, and the sector. We do not do projects ourselves at the Land Trust Alliance. So it's sometimes hard to demonstrate the impact of that because it's one step removed. But these strong organizations, leaders, and a strong sector are what you need to achieve those results over time. Because our members are so varied, we think a lot about what our value proposition is for every member. And sometimes it is hard to make sure we are covering every niche. We want to make sure that we are serving our largest land trusts, our smallest land trusts, and everyone in between. So we think about that in the development of our programs. And then I'll just say, we never, as all of you can agree, never have enough resources to take on the challenges that people come to us. We serve our members and we help to lead our sector. And those are sort of two pieces at the heart of what we do. And there will always be more requests than we can fulfill in terms of helping to convene and helping to provide everything the sector needs. So we look to prioritize that. We are also seeing challenges to private land conservation in the US that we are needing to engage on. We are a mature sector in the US, but there's still a very low understanding and awareness of private land as a strategy among the general public and how effective it is at achieving multiple goals and delivering multiple benefits for communities. So we still think we have a relevance issue that we need to build that relevance among the public, and so we've been working with our members to do that. We are seeing active opposition to conservation easements, and we're seeing that grow. So we are helping our members defend against that. It's often misinformation driven too, so you need to sort of bring truth to the table in these conversations. This isn't so much a challenge as it is an imperative, which is that land conservation grew up in the US, which is a product of systemic oppression and has a history of injustice and inequity, and privilege, white privilege. So we are thinking a lot about how we evolve land conservation to be more inclusive, to be more equitable, and to make space for and to evolve to be a place where everyone can address their land conservation priorities. And we have to get this right, and it's really important that we do. Resources are always an issue, so we're thinking about creative funding. Where do we innovate beyond just the philanthropic, the government, those kinds of things. And then we're seeing evolutionary challenges ourselves, like as a sector. I would say the two big ones we're seeing are generational succession. If we're a 42-year-old organization and the major growth in our sector really happened in the 80s and 90s, our first generation of leaders they're retiring, a lot of them. And so we are thinking about who is coming up next, what is the leadership we are helping to build and support for the sector moving forward. And then the weight of forever is really hitting hard. Forever is a really long time. And if you commit to stewarding forever, what does that really look like? How does the community prepare itself, and how do we help support that so we are ready to meet the challenges ahead? So that's all I would share.
That's excellent.
Yep.
Thank you very much. What I failed to say, because I didn't know that Charlie had won the Nobel Peace Prize, was that one of the functions of the ILCN is to be a network of networks. We not only support many people from all kinds of land conservation organizations around the world, we really help networks like the LTA. I don't know how much we help you, but we try to be helpful and informative, and ALCA and so on, ELCN, grow over time and add capacity. So this forum is a chance for us to compare the challenges that we've got and begin a dialogue among the mostly the big networks, of how we do that in a coordinated fashion in a way that helps one another. So we're going to go a little bit out of order because Maria Cristina.
Oh, do you want me to?
No, I'm good. I'm good. Maria Cristina has to get to the airport, and we want to respect that. Let's see.
You want to go to the end of the deck?
Yeah. Actually, yes. Why don't you help me, and I'll talk.
Yes.
So she has a really incredible career. She was the technical director of the Brazilian Confederation of Private Nature. She is the technical director of the Brazilian Confederation of Private Nature Reserves. Before that, she did the same for the Association of Private Nature Reserves of Minas Gerais, is that how you say it? Gerais. And the Institute for Studies and Nature Conservation. She's a member of has been a member of the WCPA and IUCN since 2016. She holds a master's in geography and a PhD in production engineering. She was honored with a scholarship from the British Council, and she studied in London and has published widely and gone to many, many meetings like this. We're lucky to have her. And please, Maria, Christina. Yes, you can. They're right in front of you. But they're hard to see over the top of the table. Okay.
First of all, I would like to thank Jim for the invitation and Shandley. Yes, I think it's better from that. Is it possible? I saw some people.
Of course it's possible. But you need to go this way. Yep. Okay.
So first of all, I would like to thank Jim and Shandley for the invitation, as well as Veronique and Robin for all the support for my participation at ILCN Congress. And I want to give Jim a collection of some publications of private nature reserves in Brazil.
Thank you. All right, we'll put these in.
Yes. They are mostly in Portuguese because they are produced for schools for an environmental education program. So I represent here the Brazilian Confederation of Private Natural Heritage Reserves, or Private Nature Reserves is easier to say. And I can go on. The Confederation was created in 2001 and has purpose to coordinate associations of private natural heritage reserves to have a greater representation with federal and private institutions as well as with the civil society. Since 1997, 16 state associations were created in Brazil, as well as a municipal association in Curitiba and also a network in Manaus region, Amazonia. But unfortunately, only 5 remain active due to several reasons: lack of volunteer work, lack of funds, unfortunately. And we organized several congresses, national congresses. The first one was in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil, with 200 participants. The second one was in Paraná, Curitiba, south of Brazil, with 320 participants, including 100 RPPN landowners. The third Congress was in Ilhéus, Bahia, northeastern Brazil, with 500 participants. The backpacks, the first day there were no more backpacks. And noteworthy the participation of 12 presidents of the 15 existing RPPN associations at this time. Then we had the 4th Congress, which was in the south of Brazil, and this Congress was together with the meeting of natural reserves of Pampa. Pampa is a grass field vegetation of Brazil in the southern cone, and it was in Porto Alegre, the capital of Rio Grande do Sul, with 170 participants. The 5th Congress was in Florianópolis, Santa Catarina, Brazil, in 2018. And we also had the highlight, a very famous Brazilian singer named Mato Grosso. He's a private nature reserve in Brazil owner. We have several famous owners, such as Sebastião Salgado, the photographer, a famous journalist, an actor, and they believing in this idea of and this protection as an RPPN. And the 6th Congress, was a virtual one due to the pandemic. It was made in our TV RPPN Brazil with more than 1,000 participants. That was a big success, this Congress. So the Confederation is a non-government organization. It has bylaws, a board of directors is officialized. And is as such, it participates of several programs in Brazil, such as the Pro Species from WWF. And this year, we have been invited to 2 very important events held in Brazil. A meeting of protected area managers in Foz do Iguaçu. And there is the picture on the right, is the Atlantic Forest Working Group, the one I joined. And we also had a workshop of creation of federal protected areas, discussing with the civil society and with universities, a very, very important meeting, all held this year. And we also involved with virtual events, such as we have a coffee hour with the private nature reserve owners online. Sometimes we organize it, and regional roundtable with RPPN owners and managers. And we had a very interesting partnership with a YouTube channel from the Observatory of Justice and Conservation. And they have shown every 2 weeks, more or less, I think at more than 50 private nature reserves from Brazil. The one in the picture is the private nature reserve from my family land, which is a small agricultural company. It is forest fragments and 2 wildlife corridors, which began in the 80s, thanks to a report from the Australians. And we learned how to do it with the Australians. And we have a very, very important interactive dashboard, the Confederation, which is a very important reference for the government officials and for several networks and NGOs. And these dashboards you can have access in our site, the website of the Confederation. It shows the total of private nature reserves in Brazil, the total area protected, and the distribution by region and by state. And also the area protected by the private nature reserves per state is always being updated. It's a very important reference in Brazil. And we managed to produce a virtual book, which is RPPN Forever, Tales, Enchantments, and Challenges is the name of the book. It has the history of the private natures in Brazil. It has a few interesting previous chapters, and then it has several chapters from reserves all over Brazil, from the most diverse regions and characteristics. There are some literary texts, there are some technical texts. It's a very, very outstanding work. And you can get a free download in our site. If you want to take a picture, you can get the name of our site. That was one of the main, and we still want to print it someday. We want to get some funds to print it. And we also have political advocacy to influence laws and public policies in favor of conservation in private lands in Brazil. So we have been following this bill of the Federal Congress, which is about the private nature reserves. And we also send open letters to candidates. We have one which was signed by Marina Silva, the Ministry of Environment. So it's very important that official or associations and confederations, we can have a political role. As regards to conservation finance, we have been involved with carbon market. We have been involved with Apsis Carbon, is one of the companies, enterprises, and more recently with 6 bios, they even prepared a slide to show here, but it was too late already to send the slide. We had a meeting recently. We are already having some private nature reserves that will get funds from this carbon market through these company 6 bios. And we also have calls. We had this year was the Atlantic Forest SOS that made a very important call to create private nature reserves and to implement them. And we had several calls already made by TNC together with Conservation International and SOS Atlantic Forest for the several years. So several private nature reserves created in Brazil are very grateful to this very important NGO that gave them the opportunity to be created and implemented also. And this year I had the honor to be one of the evaluators. I had evaluated 3 very good projects for implementation in private nature reserves. And we also have a brochure, one in Portuguese, and I'm showing the one in English here. A brochure with information on the organization, including mission, actions, projects, board of directors, and contact information, and the history of our organization. And it's a virtual brochure. I can also, if I'll give some cards to Jim to distribute, and you can contact me and I can send the brochure, and you can get the download of the book in the website. As the main threat to private nature reserves in Brazil is certainly the climate change, provoking very, very severe forest fires, and not only forests, but in other kinds of vegetations too. This one affected Sesc Pantanal, in the Pantanal biome. It's a wetlands in Brazil. Sesc is a very big association of traders in Brazil. And they have the bigger private nature reserve in Brazil with 108,000 hectares. They even have a fire brigade. And the Confederation is a member of the council. So this is by far the biggest threat we have in Brazil. And for next year, to be more positive, we are preparing for the next Congress, the 7th Congress, which is going to be held in Belo Horizonte, is the capital of Minas Gerais in southeastern Brazil. And Fundação Biodiversitas, Biodiversitas Foundation, is going to help us organizing the Congress, which is going to be held together with the 10th workshop of the Association of Private Nature Reserves of Minas Gerais. And I thank you for your attention. Merci.
Thank you so much. So, as far as I know, this is the first time that we've had participation from a Brazilian network. And we're very glad to have you join this network of networks, Maria. We're very happy to have you join the network, and we look forward to having greater participation over time. So with With that, the next up is Renata. Renata has been in the land trust. Renata is a native of the Czech Republic and has lived in Canada for 30 years. Longer than you lived in the Czech Republic. She was very active in the Nature Trust of New Brunswick before migrating to become, at present, the president and CEO of the Association of Canadian Land Trusts, the ACLT, which, frankly, is the second time that the Canadians have tried to build a national association. We think that this one is going pretty well. So, Renata, please take the floor.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you everybody for coming to listen to this amazing panel and for showing us the way through relationship building and network building, because we really need it here in Canada. And for me, it was very amazing to be part of actually meeting my own colleagues and planning what future will bring us. And thank you, Jim, for what you are doing. It's really impressive. I had no idea. So there you go. So I will talk about the Alliance of Canadian Land Trusts. So as Jim mentioned, Canada has quite a long history of attempting a creation of national organization that supports the local and regional land trusts. And today I am here for the Alliance of Canadian Land Trusts. Just to give you the brief history, between 2006 and 2010, we had the Canadian Alliance of Canadian Land Trust Alliance, and we thank them for the building blocks that they created, but unfortunately the model didn't quite work out. But what this organization did was created the Canadian Land Trust Standards and Practices with the help of the American counterparts of the Land Trust Alliance, and our land trusts are using those until today. These standards and practices have become the key product for advancing our sector and building their capacity. In 2015, we have thought we need another new organization, and we started to work on Land Trust Canada. And I've been kind of in all of them because I don't know why, but that's probably why I'm here today. And during that time when we created this new organization, we actually incorporated it. There was a really huge need for more of advocacy for funding for land trusts. So we kind of parked the Land Trust Canada and created working group of land trusts across Canada who were lobbying for better setup of funding sources from federal government that would be given to the land trusts. And this group was extremely successful. They actually managed to receive their own funding under bigger agreements. And since then, about 2018, the land trusts are receiving their own funding through the federal government. And during these times, there was also another organization created that assumed the previous organization's charitable status, the Center for Land Conservation, which is, I see them as a sister organization. It's an organization that helps the land trust with potential accreditation program and is building their space as a Canadian Lincoln Institute, pretty much, something like that.
That's their idea.
That's their idea. Okay, that's what they keep telling me. And again, it was very exciting to meet them here, talking, going through projects, and we are hoping to work with them hand in hand. So while we are preparing the land trusts to adopt and implement their standards and practices, this organization then can do the accreditation and so on. So now, since 2022, we have our own organization that is founded by the 3 regional alliances: Ontario Land Trust Alliance, Alliance of British Columbia, and Réseau des milieux naturels protégés here in Quebec. So even though we are national land trusts, we are working together, these 4 alliances, on pretty much most of the projects where the Alliance of Canadian Land Trusts is bringing a value on the national level. And we did have our first summit also in 2022. And the beauty also about creating us, we did quite extensive surveys of land trusts, and we got 100% support from the land trusts that they want us to be created. So why do we think our organization is now set up for success? We were created by land trusts and the regional alliances for land trusts. So there is no hierarchy, but rather the regional alliances have members in their regions, and they're automatically our members without paying extra fees. We are dealing with all the fees internally, and unless they choose not to be our members. So we started really high at 134 members. We are not dealing with associate membership right now. We are a quite young organization. But often when we are talking about the alliance, we are saying we are representing the 150 plus minus land trusts that exist in Canada. Because just if these land trusts are not members of the regional alliances, it doesn't mean that we don't talk with the other land trusts that are not members. And when we set up this organization, we did extensive surveys with the land trusts. So they told us what they want us to be. And their needs were support for increased conservation on the land. They wanted to see more collaborative leadership in conservation. They requested that they need help with capacity building and conservation funding. And they wanted us to become advocacy or lobbying voice for the land trust sector on the national level. Yes, so that's where we were. So what is the recent momentum, or what have we done in the last 2 years? Well, we became the charitable organization. That's a process. I'm sure you guys all know that. It was something. The first thing we did was a lobbying campaign for land trust. We really, if you ask Canadian, what is land trust? If you ask even member of parliament, what is land trust? They're like, huh? So we actually we started with a lobbying campaign to the federal government, and probably spoke with 65 members of parliament and other bureaucrats. We sent a letter signed by 87 land trusts to the prime ministers and key ministers, and now we are even working on a petition, parliamentary petition, basically just claiming our space and showing government what the land trust can do in order to achieve the global biodiversity framework and the nature strategy that has been developed by Canadian government. And the other thing we did is adopting one of the regional alliances tool. It's an online tool of standards and practices that now all land trusts across Canada can use. And it's a community of practice where land trusts can work on their standards and practices, policies, procedures, ask questions, and also share their finished products with other organizations. And we are hoping to work with the Center for Land Conservation that eventually, once the land trusts are ready for, let's say, accreditation, we can somehow create a, stream that automatically can send it to the Center for Land Conservation for accreditation. And we also developed quite a few guiding documents for land trusts, such as conservation tools for municipalities, starter guide for land trusts, including Indigenous land trusts, partnerships, potential for partnership, Indigenous communities, municipalities, and environmental groups collaborating together, tax incentives, and many other things. Yes, so that's what we've done. And again, I cannot reiterate how important it is that these 4 alliances are working together. Every project we do, we make sure that the alliances are benefiting, and in turn, the land trusts are benefiting, and we are just adding the value by the Land Trust Alliance, the Alliance of Canadian Land Trusts, on the national level. So we are currently also working on a national campaign promoting land trust. And do you know how simple it is? We just need Canadians to know what is land trust. So, you know, we don't have to even dig deep into innovation right at this moment. And what are the challenges and growth planning? So we are a startup. We are barely 2 years old, and we need to diversify funding. I was so happy not to hear from you guys that you're not worried about your elections. We are. Yes, so trying to keep our heads cool, but it is something we are gearing for and making sure that we can survive past 2026 if there's a huge change in our government. And we also overcoming competition in the national level of land conservation, you know, because we are the new kid on a blog, and we want to be respectful, but at the same time, we have to gain that respect by working with other organizations. And I know that TNC, for example, is a member of your organization. The way we are set up, Nature Conservancy of Canada is not our member. We cannot benefit them very much. However, we really want to have strong partnership with large national organizations like Nature Conservancy, Ducks Unlimited Canada, a Center for Land Conservation, and so on. And one of the other biggest challenges we have, because we didn't have this alliance for many years, there is a huge inconsistency in data. So we are currently mapping and collecting data of all land trusts. Because if we want more money, more programs, and benefit the land trust, we need to tell the story. So we are hoping that that project will advance really soon. And as all you know, we need to also report to different databases to report nationally and internationally. So that's what we are working on as well. So thank you so much.
That was very concise. Thank you. So I want to give the panelists a heads up as we go forward. One of the things I'm curious about, particularly Renata, as you gave your presentation, I don't want you to answer it now, but we'll do this at the end, is what can a network of networks, what can a group of people from all over the world who have network challenges similar to yours, what can we do to help? What can we do to provide value to your network? And I don't think we're going to resolve that today, but I think it's a really interesting question that we can add a lot of value for. Tillman, I think you're up. Is Tillman next? I think that's how we have it set up. No? Jody. I'm wrong. All right, so I'll introduce Jody. Jody is the new president of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance. You took over last year, is that correct? 3 years. Okay, so she's been through COVID. She came in right at the beginning of COVID, and now is doing face-to-face in Australia in a huge way. And I will just sum up what I know about Jody. We spent a week we meaning Chandi and I visited Australia to begin to plan for the 2027 Congress. And we found an incredibly energetic, enthusiastic, capable group of people waiting for us with open arms, and we felt treated like royalty, and we really look forward to building this alliance over time. So Jody Gunn.
Thank you, Jim. It was an absolute pleasure to have you and Chadney over to explore the potential and opportunities that we've got in working together. I'd just like to acknowledge before I get started the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the lands on which LCA and all of our members in Australia work on, and acknowledge in particular their 60,000 years of care, responsibility and connection to country, and that is enduring and ongoing. And thank the welcome to Canada here as well over these last few days. It's been really special, including last night's very special moon ceremony. As Jim mentioned, I'm the CEO of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, and we are a peak body that represents organisations that work to protect, manage and restore nature across privately managed land. Our purpose is to grow a diverse, highly capable and resourced sector that protects, stewards and restores Australia's privately managed lands to reverse nature loss for a healthy and resilient Australia. We have 19 members now, and I'll tell you a bit of the story of our growth. And they span from Eastern Australia to Western Australia, Queensland down to Tasmania. They are large national organisations, they are small local organisations, they are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations. A little bit about our journey, and it's great to have some of our colleagues here in the room with us, because I feel like many of this part of the journey could be told by each of them, and I particularly would just like to note Victoria Miles, who is in the room with us today, who is the chair of LCA, but also was the visionary of what LCA could be. She attended the Land Trust rally, and she was there in the formative stages of the ILCN, and through those discussions thought about what a land trust alliance or a peak body or an alliance could look like, what a network could look like in Australia. At the time, Vic Miles was also the CEO of the Trust for Nature in Australia, which is an organisation that works with private landholders all across a state of Australia, Victoria, that are protecting forever the conservation or biodiversity assets on properties that they might be stewarding. And so through her vision and through the networks that she had been forming globally, came up with the idea and worked with a group of people around what could an alliance look like, and reached out to the other state-based organisations that also had the mechanism of covenants. So in America you call them easements, in Australia it's covenants. So a tool that protects biodiversity forever. And so the Australian Land Conservation Alliance was formed, and that was back in 2011, and it was formed by those state-based trusts that have the permanent protection mechanism. Across the next few years, the Alliance operated on a voluntary basis. It built the vision, it built the purpose, they convened monthly. Sometimes they had resourcing, sometimes they didn't have resourcing. What mattered was that they connected no matter what. At that time, there were 6 or 7 member organisations that would convene, and they might share a steering committee role or a chair role, and the Trust for Nature in Victoria was really foundational to that. In 2015, they had the first conference, and so there were 150 delegates from across Australia that came to the first conference, and I think again built on some of the visioning and experiences that had been had through the Land Trust Alliance rallies, through the connections with the ILCN, recognising and realising that networks were important, that learning from each other was absolutely critical to advance the challenges that we faced. And through the global networks was able to amplify the learnings and the opportunities by accessing global voices, global stories, and bringing those to Australia so as to share experiences and knowledge and allow people to think outside the box about what might be possible and what are people doing elsewhere that might be relevant for us here in Australia. And we've continued that dialogue right through, sending delegations across to the Land Trust Alliance rallies. I was there last year. There's people in the room here from Australia who have gone, across the various years, and including to many of the ILCN congresses. In 2017, to 18, so a couple of years there, we had another couple of conferences. The delegations grew, more than 250 people by 2018, again using the connections to the global networks to amplify the stories. We also held our first conservation finance intensive This, again, came from learnings and experiences of what was happening over here, the Conservation Finance Network, our relationships that had been built with Peter Stein, and we came back and thought, how can we amplify and build capacity of our sector to think outside the usual funding streams that our organisations have in Australia, and build capacity to engage in different kinds of funding mechanisms to drive their work. And those finance intensives have continued year on year, and we held one again only last week. And our memberships expanded. So at this stage, the organisations were the state-based trusts that had a permanent protection mechanism. In 2017, strategically decided to expand to include some of the large national organisations to drive and build a level of influence and profile that ALCA could have in representing large organisations that are operating at a national level. In 2019, the organisation incorporated, and that was a really foundational moment. Incorporating meant that the organisation could start generating its own revenue properly, could create a board, start driving and developing its own vision and purpose in a very strategic way, and that incorporation was a really pivotal moment that allowed ALCA to go from an informal alliance to a formal alliance with a very strong voice. At that time, there were 11 founding members, and they stay founding members today. Our conferences have grown at this point to 350 people, and we're rotating the conferences around from state to state to make sure that they are relevant everywhere we go. In 2021 to 22, so I came on board as the CEO in 2021, we held our 6th conference. There were about 380 people by that time. We continued to build and expand our membership, and it's probably important to note that we've been deliberately staging a membership expansion, not growing beyond the capacity and capability of a small organisation. And we also were able to launch our strategic plan, which I'll talk to shortly. The last few years, again, continuing to build and grow the organisation. Another couple of conferences. We're now exceeding 400 delegates at each of our conference. We have 19 members. The focus over the last few years has been on diversity, making sure that we represent the full diversity of our sector. Our sector moved from, as we expanded our memberships, organisations to protect to organisations that protect, steward, manage and restore nature. And that included making sure that we had representation, if relevant and meaningful, for our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisations. And we now have 2 members and a representative on our board. The strategic plan has been a really important part of the development and growth of the organisation. We've got 4 goals in the strategic plan, and I'll use this slide to talk about the challenges and opportunities which we've been asked to talk to. Sector development is a really important part of the work that we do. So conferences are one thing, but trying to build a highly capable, networked and coordinated sector. We have a board, we have working groups, we have strategic dialogues, we provide briefings to our members about a range of different matters. We have now a plan right out to 2027, a 3-4 year plan for our conference program. Our conservation finance intensives are growing and building, and we've developed some pilot initiatives for capacity building across early career starters and future leaders. Policy and regulation has been a really foundational part of ALCA's work right from the beginning, and by building and growing a team, it started when I started, there was 1 CEO, we now have 7 people, and just going back to sector development, one of the first people that I employed was an events manager. We recognised that running these kinds of events was going to be really important, and so Phoebe's in the room with us today. Policy and regulation also absolutely critical, and so being able to recruit an expert policy writer and political navigator in Michael Cornish, who's also in the room, was really foundational. We've now made hundreds of submissions. We are influencing in a meaningful way with the support and contributions and leadership of our members and their needs, and we are now recognised as a trusted voice and advisor to government. Future challenges remain national law reform, a huge national law reform, 30 by 30 targets, renewable energy and the impacts of that. There are a range of incentives and barriers for landholders right across the country that differ state by state, and obviously the delivery of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Investment. We are trying to, as an alliance, drive more investment into and across the whole sector. Private finance, government finance and philanthropy. We have been working actively on an emerging nature repair market, on private sector engagement and a relationship with the philanthropy sector. And current, future challenges include a low investment by government, environmental markets that are both good but also create a whole lot of potential challenge, and really increasing interest by the private sector but not quite sure where the rubber's going to hit the road on that, and engaging quite deeply with the philanthropy sector in that space. And finally, people, and I think everyone on the panel has mentioned this so far, transforming the way that people view, value and understand the role of the civil society organisations, Indigenous organisations and private landholders and their contribution to achieving these targets. Reports, policy notes, webinars, socials, media, all the kinds of things that we're trying to deliver to try and increase the awareness of Australia and communities on the role of private land conservation. And the challenges going forward are the competing interests, both in terms of land use but also in terms of cost of living challenges and social and global issues that are occurring at the moment. So I'll leave it there. We'll have more time for discussion, but thank you all for your time, and it is incredible to have spent the time with this panel over the last few days. So thank you for convening that.
View, value, and
Understand.
I'm really fascinated by how some common themes are emerging. Our last panelist is Tilman Disselhoff. I have said this before, I don't remember in what context, having appeared in 14 different venues in the last 3 days. But Tilman was with the Land Trust, with us, with the ILCN, at the Land Trust Alliances before the ILCN existed. It was his research in the United States about U.S. land trusts, which he wanted to take back to Germany to help them make decisions about how to deal with some public lands that appeared in Germany that helped really encourage us to form the ILCN in the first place. He was our co-host at the first Congress of the ILCN in Berlin. He did an incredible job and set an example by taking us out on a field trip to see birds, which we copied again this year very successfully. And he's just a wonderful and wise individual. So Tilman Disselhoff.
Thanks so much, Jim. Thank you for everyone for still being here. I'm keenly aware that I think I'm the last presenter on the last panel of this event, so thanks for still being in the room. There we go. So it has been a very rich meal, this event, this Congress, and I'm not going to dish you another big dish of, I don't know,
Not a big dish of pasta, please.
Not a big dish of pasta. No, okay, so some sweets and maybe a bitter digestif to go with from Europe, and you pick what you like better. So I'm just going to tell you about our network in Europe. Europe is a very small, old, crowded, complicated continent. It's less than twice the size, the EU, than Canada. I had to look that up. I couldn't believe it, but we have more than 10 times the population of Canada. And that tells you a little bit about the opportunities and challenges of setting up a land conservation network in a place like that. We have very dense institutional landscapes of conservation NGOs in various countries, but we have very little land and competing land users, stakeholder groups we have to work with in one way or the other. The way our network operates right now is different from the ones you heard before. We basically took over an existing organization. It was a friendly takeover, but it was a takeover 5 years ago. That organization was and is still called Eurosite. It was founded in '89, so it's now 35 years old. And if you think back to '89, I was 12 years old and I saw the Berlin Wall come down, and some of you may not even have been born then, but it was a different time, I would say. That was founded because the European Union had just adopted legislation to create a network of protected areas across Europe, and people were trying to figure out what to make of these new protected areas. So it was an organization focusing on publicly protected areas. And through the interaction with people like Jim, Laura, and others in this room and at this Congress, we really got inspired to widen our scope and look beyond publicly protected areas. Some people who were working in the conservation space back then, and we renamed Eurosite into Eurosite, the European Land Conservation Network, and we widened its mission and said we want to work on all kinds of land, not just within protected areas. So that happened 5 years ago, and the effect has been astounding, I think, that it gave us a new purpose, and it has led to a dramatic growth in capacity and projects and activities. So, and also partnerships, I should say. The graph you see down there is the average, or no, it's the evolution of the staff size at the Secretariat. It's just to show you that it's not always been linear. I mean, we all have these nice growth trajectories, right? But it has gone up and down. This is with a grain of salt because I just researched on LinkedIn who claims to have worked for Eurosite as part of their resume, and some people may not even want to say that, or may not be on LinkedIn because they're out of the workforce. So this is with a grain of salt. You know, as you go back, it's probably underrepresenting it, but it shows you in the last years that there has been quite a nice growth of capacity at the Secretariat. Nevertheless, we are, so many things that have been said before resonate with me in terms of our challenges. We never have enough people to do the work that we want to do. We never have enough money and so forth. So that I don't know how to break that vicious circle of under capacity. Well, you know what I mean. You all work for conservation NGOs, so I don't have to tell you this. All right, I'll leave it at that. Our services are the ones that are typical for a networking organization. One thing that I find interesting, and I think it's also true for all the other networks that we heard about, is we don't do deals on the ground. So we don't engage in land transactions or so. We try to help our members to do that, to be better at what they do. But we don't, and that is to avoid the perception that we compete in that market. But I learned from other smaller organizations, networking organizations, such as the Appalachian Corridor that we went to visit a few days ago, that they actually do that, and they have a double role. They have transactions on the ground and they do networking, and I find that a very interesting aspect to discuss whether that's adding value to a network, whether they also have, should have some ground game or not. Another thing that also came up is the value proposition, that what's our unique selling point. We're really good at doing a lot of stuff. We're membership organizations, and sometimes we don't really draw a line between what our services are for our members and what everyone else can enjoy. I think LTA in that sense is really good with a resource center, that you can't just access everything. It's like a gym membership where you get 3 months for free or so, and then if you want to stay. So I think these kind of business models are actually kind of interesting. Or yeah, so something that we're working on continuously. We, I said, Europe is a crowded space, so we nested ourselves in a whole ecosystem of other organizations, many of which are also networks. We create strategic partnerships, so we have signed MOUs with these organizations and others, and it helps us to understand how we can fill a certain niche in that ecosystem, because then we can spell out what they want to do, what we should do, and vice versa. And it also helps us to gain respect. I don't know, Renata, you said that, right? If you're the new kid on the block, in a way, our expansion into outside of protected areas made us a new kid on the block in some regards. And yeah, it helps us to gain respect, to be seen as a member of a wider community. This is a very ambitious slide for being almost the last one of this event, but just to show you that we have the way we work is we have thematic working groups. Those are standing working groups that basically form spontaneously almost between people that want to work on a certain issue together. And what's interesting about those working groups is they are not just of our members, we also have people joining them that are not Eurosite members. They always are chaired by a member, and we provide the letterbox for them, basically, so they can apply for grants by using Eurosite as an organization. And secondly, we have projects, and that is important to point out because we tried to grow over the last years, and the only way to do that is to get external funding. We cannot grow our membership as quickly as we wanted to, and we get membership fees, but they're now less than 20% of our overall budget. They used to be maybe a third, and we just can't grow membership quickly enough to do what we want to do. And I'm a vegetable gardener, so I like to see things grow. That's why I'm also in this organization, and growth can only come through project grants. So we've applied for projects, and I've just listed them all there. You don't have to learn those horrible European acronyms, but they are mostly from the European Union, and they have helped us to grow our budget quite dramatically, I would say, in the last years. So that's the bars right there. We've quadrupled our budget over the last 5 years or so. But that also means that you have all these project deliverables, and it's a nightmare. Everyone who knows about project grants knows that sometimes you just hate yourself for promising something 3 years ago to a funder, and now you're stuck with doing yet another webinar or yet another whatever. So aligning that with your strategic priorities is the second challenge. So we are very busy in our working groups, in our projects, and then we have strategic priorities, but they don't always align. And it's for the secretariat staff, that's a huge challenge to align that and reconcile those two things. Okay, so what's next? I'm actually flying to England from here tomorrow. We'll have our annual meeting there in Durham, starting on Monday night. So that's our big get-together. We do that on a yearly basis, so we have annual meetings, General Assembly, council meetings where we elect the board and so forth. So this will be really nice for me because I learned a whole lot the last days, and I can steal that, and almost no one who's here will be with me in Durham. I think Mikael, Matthias will be there, so and 2 or 3 others, so they won't notice how much I'm stealing. What's important about this is our strategy is coming to an end. You can see it down in the lower right-hand corner. So we'll kick off the process of doing a new multi-year strategy, and that will have to come up with a theory of change. The big question is, so what? Why are we doing all of this networking stuff? What's the impact on the ground? And I'm enviously looking at our networks like LTA, who say we have all these hectares conserved, or acres in your case, or dollars raised. We can't track that yet. We can say we've done 20 webinars, and people were happy with that, but so what? So that kicking off that strategic thinking process will be what will occupy our minds next week. And so I'm really happy about having had this opportunity here to network with you guys, to learn from you, and it has inspired me, and I feel very well nourished, and now it's time to digest, I would say. So thank you.
Very good. Okay. So I want to ask the first question of the panelists, and then we've got about 15 minutes for questions from the field. If you could name 1 or 2 things that you think the steering committee of the ILCN should think about as what we can do for networks, not what we can do for this whole huge community of practice exclusively, but in addition, what can we do to help networks collaborate and grow? So what volunteer do I have first? Jody.
Is that working? Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit like we might have almost, in our lunch break meeting yesterday, already come up with the answer, in part for that, because coming together as this group of people for this panel was a really important way for us to think about and share in preparation for this, the similarities, the challenges, the opportunities that we have. And in our discussion yesterday, had already talked about what a good opportunity it would be for us to be able to continue this dialogue together, and did mention that the ILCN could create a great platform simply for providing the space for us to have that discussion.
Charlie, can you help me by taking notes on this? I'm at capacity, so.
And if I can add to it, I think also inviting the other network that we're presenting yesterday, who are just starting, including them in those conversations as well, because we can as much learn from the brand new organizations that have 5 members. It's great, why not?
So if I understand what you're saying, sort of a Zoom call meeting every so often for a couple of presentations and discussion among leaders of networks.
Yeah, it's like community of practice, of sharing our experiences and commenting on other people's ideas, initiatives. And sometimes, you know, I might say, I'm doing this, and the other person might say, can I copy paste? Of course. You know, just having that permission conversation as well.
Excellent.
You know?
That's great.
Well, I would add, think about the ILCN as both a network of organizations and a network of networks. Right. It's not either or. So we're not speaking from ILCN's perspective, we're not a federation of networks only, but we do have networks as part of our membership or community. So it's never, you know, it's not something you can solve as a formula or so, but you have that tension between, shall we address the Australian Trust for Nature directly, or shall we go through ALCA, or can we do both? And that's something you just have to find out in dialogue, what's appropriate in any given situation. Yeah.
I agree, though, it's an and, it's not an or. Yeah.
In what concerns the Brazilian Confederation of Private Nature Reserves, I think that the invitation to be participating of this Congress was something very important for us, as we could show what we are doing in Brazil and what the Confederation role in the past, nowadays, and in the future. So that's very important. And I would like also to know how I could get more involved with ILCN programs and projects. And perhaps even to ask if you could find us, you can help us to find donors to print our virtual book about the private nature reserves in Brazil.
Very discreetly asked. Thank you.
And I would just echo what my fellow panelists had said. I think our lunch meeting was too short yesterday. We need to continue. And I would just say, you know, from the U.S., I just appreciate everything I've learned over the last day and a half, too. You know, there are ways in which, you know, we're ahead in some places and we're behind in other places. And there's a lot I have learned over the last day and a half from people who are ahead of us on certain issues, in particular addressing issues related to indigenous partnership, for example. Yeah.
If I may add one thing, it would be just keep on doing what you're doing. Yeah. You're obviously doing something right. I mean, look at us. So, yeah, thank you.
Pretty cool. Go ahead. Is there a microphone? Who's got, okay. They're recording, which is the reason we want to use the microphone.
I like maps. And I think one of the, a very simple idea, but I think there is no a global map of our networks that we are talking about. So that's a very simple thing, just mapping the existing networks that are in the world. There are maybe some areas where are being created right now, probably in I don't know, in Colombia, and just put it on the map, and with a link of their websites or whatever they have to be in contact. This is something that is very simple, but I think it's going to be very useful for many people to really know what is happening.
Good idea.
That's a very simple thing, but very useful. Thank you.
Pass the microphone back right over here.
While that's being passed, I just also, if I can, Jim, just wanted to add, going to your point and some of the things that I mentioned earlier as well, the opportunity for us, if possible, to be able to invite any First Nations networks that might exist in our own country. So in Australia, Gareth is here from the Indigenous Desert Alliance, might not otherwise naturally be included on an existing list. We've got, Kimberley Land Council is up, here in this room, and other, Indigenous networks around the world, and if we can ensure that they are included in those discussions.
Do you mind if I just add one more thing to this? Because in Canada, for example, one of our goals for the Alliance is to create co-leadership with Indigenous people of Canada for the Alliance. So just to add to that another level of the Indigenous engagement, it's huge for Canada, and I think worldwide it's a really huge thing. And if we want to succeed, it needs to go beyond just learning. It needs to be co-leadership, co-management, and so on. So, sorry.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, and congratulations for all your presentations. In particular, Ana Maria, it's always very inspiring to see what you're doing in Brazil. Your Spanish-speaking neighbors, we're always looking at what Brazil is doing to try to test it in our countries. My question I have two questions for all of you. First, in Mexico, we're struggling to create networks of voluntary conservation areas. And I wanted to ask you, in your experience, what do you think should be the main financial source to operate and maintain networks? And my second question is, what should be the role, or if there should be a role of governments in supporting or the creation or operation of networks? Thank you very much.
This was going to be sort of my question, so it may help. I was just going to ask them to go down through and say what percentage of their funding comes from government, private financial. What percentage of the funding comes from government, private philanthropy, and up from their members? And that might help inform that question too.
Can you all answer that? All right, Jody, why don't you start, and then we'll come right down. Oh, okay, Maria's going to start because she needs the lead for the shuttle.
I'm going to take the first shuttle at 12:30, so I answer this. In the case of Brazil, I think that most of the funds throughout our history, it's from governmental programs and funds for participating in meetings and for a big project we did throughout Brazil, which was money that came from the G7 to the Brazilian government. And in what concerns the main source for creating networks, in the case of Brazil, I think you need a very strong spirit of volunteer work. That's what keeps our confederation in Brazil going on. There's a lot of volunteer work in the confederation, also in the associations, and try to get some way of good fundraising techniques also. Okay.
So Jody, let's start with you on the percentages and just come down the line.
We're probably 25 to 30% membership fees. Probably the majority of the rest of our funding is philanthropy, and a very little amount from government. And in terms of the role of government, I would say the role of government should be more significant, both in the on-ground practice and in supporting network activity.
As I mentioned, we are a startup, so right now about 60% is federal government funding, the rest is foundations. But we also have lots of volunteers and the regional alliances that help us with many of our programs. So I'm not counting all the in-kind that is coming to our organization, but we would like to reduce that 65% to about 30%.
Yeah, I already talked about some numbers. Our 25 budget is around about 800,000 euros, 100,000 of which are membership fees, and the rest, no, not quite, but almost the rest is project grants, some service fee income, and some philanthropic money, amounting to maybe another 100,000. Yeah, so mostly public project grants. That's the biggest construction side we have right now, is to increase funding from private and philanthropic sources.
Yeah, so in some ways similar makeup. About 13% of our funding comes from our member dues, membership. Another 7 or 8% is events and earned revenue, so webinars and our rally conference. A tiny percentage from other, and then the remaining sort of 77% is active fundraising, and some of that is from government grants. A lot has changed for us. We've had a very consistent agreement, for example, with the state government, where we bring in almost $4.5 million now a year, and almost all of that goes out as re-grants to land trusts in the state. So we have a partnership with a state agency where they are using the Land Trust Alliance's knowledge of capacity building and of the sector and our relationships within the land trust community there to make sure that their resources are getting out to build capacity, to help facilitate transactions, to help support stewardship on the ground. Rather than managing that themselves, they essentially are contracting with us to do that. So I will say our role as a sort of in partnership with some government agencies has changed a lot. We also have a new partnership around helping land with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, USDA, in the US, to help land trusts better access their resources. So we have built a staff basically who serve as advisors and coaches in developing applications to access funding at the federal level that is not necessarily being accessed as effectively as it can now. So we do bring in some federal funding, and it's generally project related that is meant to help get funding to the right places or to access that funding better. And we also do we get some funding for our education, development, training, things like that.
And then for the ILCN, we're part of an operating foundation that has an endowment. So that's a very, very fortunate thing. We do, for events like this, do a lot of fundraising. And I would say, I don't remember exactly the proportion, but I would say about half of that comes from corporations and about half of that comes from governments. So it's a mix of endowment funding from a foundation, government, and private philanthropy. And I would say that there's an additional benefit to trying to go out and raise money, especially from governments and private philanthropy, which is that you really have to make your case. You have to define your strategy. You have to tell them what it is you want to do and how you intend to do it. And then you have to deliver. And that imposes discipline on an organization, which is really a good thing to have. Because if you're aiming towards a specific target and you continue to go for it, you're more likely to get where you want to go. It is 12 o'clock. It's time for lunch. We have just completed, Tillman, thank you for the digestif. The last breakout panel of the day, but we have a very important plenary panel that will include the Environment Minister of Canada during lunch. So please go back to the main room we were in, and we will conclude the program there. Thank you very much.